I want you to know that when I first came to the United States, I was 6 weeks in 7th grade, not speaking any English. And this is what I looked like. Whoops. Anyway, I will tell you my story. I was born in December of 1935. I was born in a small village outside of Vilna called Miagel. My parents were wealthy people, and my father helped a lot of the people in the village. He had a dry goods store. He had sold yard goods, and people used to come to him to buy the yard goods because they didn't have stores like they do nowadays. You had to make your own dresses, coats, wedding dresses, and so the people would always come to him, and he became their friend. Not only did they live there, the people were very, very poor. They came there, and he would tell them to go in his orchard and pick apples, milk the cows for milk for their children. They had lots of chickens. And I'm telling you all this because those are the people that during the war helped my father, helped us. We lived normal lives. I was too young to be in school yet. But when the Germans came in, they had us all wear the Star of David in yellow on the front and on the back. You could not walk outside unless you had that on. Germans decided to put the Jewish people all in a ghetto. And the ghetto was, everybody has a different picture of what a ghetto looks like. In our village, it was one street. It was assigned for the Jewish people, and my father was a very smart man, and he saw the writing on the wall. When we were all told to go into the ghetto, my father ran away. He went to find a place for us to live, for us to hide. He asked different people, those people that were his friends. And that day, the next day, they were telling the people that they were taking them to work. But instead of taking them to work, they took them in the center of the village, and they massacred them. They threw hot water at them. They had the dogs bite at them. And I remember my father, we didn't know where my father was, but I remember my mother and my two aunts were standing at a window, and I was too little to really see out the window, and they were crying and pulling their hair out and what they saw. And I kept saying, I would pull on my mother's skirt and I say, I want to see, I want to see, I want to see. And finally she was tired of hearing me say that, so she picked me up. And you could see the dogs running after the people. What they did is they made the people, the Jewish people, dig a huge hole. And all the people that were already dead, they pulled into that hole. Those were the still alive. And then they pushed all those people that were still alive, and they shot randomly into that hole. I just can't describe what that was like. And we thought our father was there with them. It was just a sight. That night, my father came to the door, and it was like seeing a ghost to take us out of the ghetto. And I remember, I mean, there are some things that I remember as I remember, but there are other things that I think I remembered because of the stories that my father and mother repeated so many times that I'm not really sure what I remember myself. Anyway, we went out of the ghetto. My father said, "You have to go right away. You have to go right away." And he said, "Let's stop at our house. The children may need some warm clothes." So we stopped at the house, but when we were in there, they must have told the SS that we were in the house. And so they came to get us. And the SS man, they were celebrating. He was drunk. And he says, "Rouse, Rouse, get out, get out." And so we tried to get out, and my father tried to run away from them. And the SS just shot him right there in front of us. Here I am, a little girl, 6 years old, and I saw my father being shot right in front of me, and there's nothing you can do, or they shoot you too.
A number of years ago, I went to do research in the 42nd Street Library in Manhattan. I found the telephone book, the last telephone book printed in Warsaw, and it was printed in 1938. And in that telephone book, I found my grandfather's name. And I have to tell you about my family. My grandfather was also the wealthiest man in the community, and the community was a suburb of Warsaw. It's now part of this city of Warsaw, the central city, but at that time it was a suburb. It was sort of out in the country, and all around his home and his factory were little houses, and people took in work from other factories, and they also manufactured little things to make a living. So it was everybody was working at something. The women made hats. Everyone wore hats at the time. They made gloves, things. Now, my grandfather made seltzer water, and it was in the siphons, big glass bottles with a little thing you pressed on top, and the water came out all with bubbles and delicious. And he had wagons, and he also had trucks. And the soda water was delivered all over, well, not all over Poland, but in a large part of it. He had rather a big factory. And my grandfather came up with an idea that had never been done before, which was to incorporate the juice of fruit into the soda water. So he was the first one to make flavored soda anywhere in the world. I'm very proud of that. And I'm just going to stop here for a moment, and I want to tell you, my mother had 3 brothers, and she was one of 5 sisters. So and they were all adults. So you can imagine, they all married, they all had children. So you imagine what a huge family that was, right? Okay, of that family, I'll take you to the end, only 2 survived, and that was me and my Uncle Jacob. So Uncle Jacob was very interested in current events and what was happening. And he had a radio, a battery-operated radio, a Telefunken, a German radio. And he constantly listened to the radio and read newspapers, and he knew something was happening. And he warned the family that the Germans were arming and that the Germans had airplanes and tanks, and the Polish people, including the members of his immediate family, all of whom were intelligent adults, said, no, our army, we have spirit and we have courage and we'll defeat the Germans if they attack. And besides, you don't really know. And he said, no, the Germans have tanks, and what we have for an army is cavalry. We have these officers in beautiful uniforms. They sit on horses, and they have courage and spirit, but what's a guy on a horse going to do with a tank? My grandfather was finally convinced, and he picked up the telephone, and he made calls all over the place, and the family finally gathered in my grandfather's courtyard, and we all got into his horse-pulled wagons and trucks in which he delivered the sodas. And there were a number of wagons and a number of trucks, and even the neighbors came, and whoever wanted to come with us came. And while we were knowing that the Germans were coming, airplanes suddenly came from Germany is adjacent, began dropping bombs on Poland, on Warsaw rather, and 90% of the city was destroyed as we attempted to escape. So the city was on fire, explosions, burning, smoke, and we left the city heading east. Germany was to the west. We were going in the opposite direction. Finally, we got to an area which was out of the city, and with that, one plane came, and it came, and seeing this caravan of people, the pilot decided he was going to be a hero. And so he swooped down on the caravan and shot and killed people, killed horses, children. They were screaming. Mothers were screaming for their children. Children were screaming for their parents. Bodies were lying all over the place. The plane went back around and came around for a second time, and my Uncle Jacob said, "This is ridiculous. We're not moving anyway, and we're a target in this caravan. We're getting off the road. We're going to ditch the trucks because that's what they see from up there, and we're going to get only in the wagons." And so we're all going to pile into the wagons, and some of us are going to walk, and we're going to try to escape. While we were escaping, a secret agreement was signed by Stalin and Hitler. And the secret agreement was, I'm going to take half of Poland, and you're going to take the other half. So Hitler took the west side of the Bug, and Stalin got the right side of the Bug. And this happened just as we arrived to cross the river to keep going east. And in the east part of Poland lived my grandmother's sister, and that was our destination. That was as far as we could get from the Germans who were invading Poland. Just as we got to the river, we found out that on the other side, it was Soviet. Well, my grandmother took one look at the river, and she found out the only way we could cross is by rowboats at night. She said, I can't swim. I'm afraid of the water. I can't do this. And my grandfather said, I can't do it either. I can't start a whole new life. I'm too old to start all over again somewhere else. We're going back. And most of the family went back with them. They all went back to Warsaw. They all perished either in the Warsaw Ghetto or in the concentration camps that they were sent to. The entire family, except Uncle Jacob and his wife and daughter, my parents and I, and one young man who was a relative of Uncle Jacob's wife, a young nephew. So we crossed the river in the middle of the night, and I forgot to tell you one thing because I wasn't following my little script. I mentioned the nanny that I had, this old woman. She had been my mother's nanny. I was the last. I was the youngest grandchild. I was the last. So she loved me the most because she had just... So as we were leaving, she ran up to our whatever conveyance we were in, truck, I suppose, and she said to my mother, take this, and she gave her her rosary. Are there any Catholics in the room? Anybody Catholic? Okay, well, you know how precious a gift that was. And my mother said, no, but she insisted. And so my mother took her rosary and put it in her breast pocket. And I forgot to tell you one other thing, which is very important. When we all left Warsaw, all of us brought our best new coats. It was September. It was about to be winter. My mother had just had a coat made with a fur collar, and she had a fur muff. You know what a muff is? It was used instead of a pocketbook. You put your hands inside and kept them warm, and you also kept your glasses or your wallet or whatever, your lipstick. And this was this gorgeous coat with the fur trim, and this is how we escaped. And everybody wore their brand new winter clothes and their new boots and their new whatever it was. Well, now as we're crossing the river, I want to get back to the clothes. Don't let me forget the coat. As we're in the middle of the river, it's night. Some fisherman my Jacob hired is rowing us across. My mother, the fisherman, and I are the only ones in the boat. It's a little boat. There are two other boats, Jacob and his family, and my father and this young nephew are in the third boat. And it's dark. It's a foggy night, so we'll be safer because we don't know if there's a bridge nearby and if there are guys with guns on the bridge or snipers anywhere around. So we feel safe in the fog at night. And I am tiny. I know the story only from having heard it because I don't remember it. I was probably asleep on my mother's shoulder. The rower stops in the middle of the lake and stares at my mother. My mother, not knowing what to do, pulls out the rosary and begins to say the rosary. Is that what you say the rosary or you pray the rosary? She begins to pray the rosary as she heard Honora, this nanny, do her entire life. So she knew because Honora was very religious and my mother had heard this all her life. So she begins to pray the rosary. And the guy stops rowing and he says, "Thank you, Lord. Madam, thank you Thank you, thank you. Oh, I'm so happy I won't be going to hell, because I thought you were Jews. And I see you praying the rosary. You would not have reached the other side. I would have drowned you in the river.
My oldest brother was 27 when I was born to the same mother. And it was a very nice, lovely family. All the children were healthy, mentally, physically. We were not extremely well-to-do for sure, but all the children went to school, high school, and those who finished high school went to university. When we were Czechs, my siblings, 5 of them, went to Prague to the university. One studied medicine, one studied law, one studied architecture, and so forth. But when Hitler came into being and occupied Czechoslovakia in 1939, those siblings of mine, and we became Hungarians, they ended up coming back home because they were wanting to go to America, United States, or to England, but unless somebody sent them that documentation that they would be taken care of, they couldn't go to those places. So my siblings ended up coming back to home. And that wasn't good because they ended up, my brothers, 3 of them, ended up in forced labor, which meant that the Hungarian and German soldiers were fighting against the Russians over Polish territory, and the Jewish boys, their job was to put mines down. And when they put mines down and they were captured by the Russians, that was very good for my brothers because that's how they managed to stay alive. One brother who was in Prague at the university, studied architecture, he was the only one who managed to go to England. But we at home did not know what was happening. Because, today you all have Facebook and you have telephones and you can speak day and night and all that. This did not exist. We did not have telephones at home. If somebody wanted to make a telephone call, you know where they had to go? To the public post office and make an appointment to use a telephone. So there was completely isolation. At the beginning, they could maybe send a postcard, but toward later we couldn't even send a postcard to each other. And the mail, it was only mail, no airplane flying kind of mail delivery. But these were all minor. We were at home, 5 sisters, and my parents, and one of my sisters had a baby, and she was at home. We had curfews. I couldn't go to school after I was 13, and we were not allowed to go out after a certain time of day. We couldn't go shopping, food shopping, and things were very tough. And then a rule came in 44 spring, early spring, like March, that we have to vacate our home and move in with somebody, whoever lived on a particular street, which became a ghetto. So we ended up living with some relatives that we had on that street. But to leave the house where my parents lived for so many years, all the children were born in that same house, to leave in 24 hours was a big, terrible thing for us. And what to take with us was difficult because we didn't have any means of transportation, and there were no young men around anymore. Only the women, and I was the youngest girl in my family. And my parents were not so young anymore. And it was difficult to know for how long we will be away from home and what to take with us in our hands that we could carry. So we did that in 24 hours. We waited and we moved in. We took with us some things like any little jewelry we had, like rings or necklace, thinking that we can use it to buy bread with that. Anything that was a big item, like a silver tray or a plate or a tea set, whatever people used those days, my mother had the good idea to bury that under firewood that we used to use in winter time for cooking at fire, heat. So to make a long story about that, the very next day, when we were not allowed to leave the ghetto anymore because there were guards, there were with their German shepherds and with their rifles, we were told not to leave the ghetto. But somehow, one of my sisters was a very courageous girl, and she asked me, I was 13, I should go with her to see what was happening at home in our house. And you can guess that the very next day, all the stuff was already dug up and stolen. The very next day. And who stole it? Probably some people who lived around, and they were waiting for us to be leaving. We were in the ghetto for a few months, and I cannot tell you big details. It was very crowded, children, old people, no young men anymore. And then a rule came and ordered that we had to vacate our ghetto place and start marching. So whatever we were still holding on for dear life, we held on, maybe an extra pair of shoes or a sweater, still not knowing where we're going to be taken or sent. We didn't hear about concentration camps then or extermination camps. We did not know. We were hoping that the family would stay together and the young people would work. People would often say, how come you didn't try to escape? And, why didn't you resist? It was resistance just by staying alive. That's all we could do, because there were lookout towers where the SS guards and the Hungarian SS guards, which they called by another name, Arrow Cross, they were shooting people randomly. We were in this big open space, no food, very, very little, and being shot at whenever they thought maybe to scare us, so we won't try to escape. Finally, after a few days, in this big open space, because there were railroad tracks, and it was not just the Jews from my town, but from the neighboring towns and villages where the Jews brought there. It was a gathering place, and the reason they took us there to begin with, because that place had railroad tracks. And then soon on the railroad tracks, the cattle cars arrived. And the cattle cars were meant to take us somewhere else. We started to load up 100 persons, children, old people, young women, young mothers, older mothers, were only in the cattle car. No young men, as I said before. And that's how we ended up in these cattle cars. It was noisy, you can imagine, smelly, dirty, hungry, everybody, dark, the place. And a lot of that I tried to shut out of my mind, so I cannot tell you too many details, and I don't want to tell you. But we finally arrived to a place, big campground. When I say camp, not a camp that you young people know, like summer camp. This was like the worst of the worst. The place was called Auschwitz. The town Auschwitz was a Polish town. Where we were taken, they were wooden blocks. There was like the length of this room, like 5 times longer, and this width, more or less, but made of wooden, like trees that were cut and made into walls. Before we ended up there in our barrack, because they called them barracks, we were told not to worry, in a gentle voice, that we will all see each other. So they gave us orders to start moving fast. Older people, men, go in one direction, the fathers, grandfathers, the mothers with children in another direction, and the young women in a third direction. And we had to move fast, and they kept reassuring us that you're going to see each other soon. Don't worry, you're going to get together. So I held my mother's hand and one of my sister's hands. And so because we had to move fast, and they said we're going to see each other, I let my mother's hand go, and I ended up going with 3 sisters, and my mother went with her oldest daughter with a baby. And that was the last time I saw my mother, my father, and my sister with a baby. Even today, when I speak about that, it's difficult for me to keep my same voice. Maybe you see that my voice is not the same, because I still sort of see what I saw then. When we were there, they didn't give me a number. You often see people show that they have a tattoo, because we were destined to be killed right away, like my parents were killed right away, and my sister with the baby. But somehow they keep postponing killing us, but forever we had to line up outside those barracks and wait forever to be counted or for being selected. We never knew what they were selecting for, because we looked healthy or we looked sick or we couldn't be working. They were trying to get people, reduce the number of people in the camps. There were millions of people there. They killed in Auschwitz over 1 million people there, mostly Jews.
Was there a point in the camp where you thought that there's no hope?
Well, every day was no hope. Because when you got sick, when a person got sick, there's very little chance to get well, because there was no medicine, and nobody asked you, do you feel okay? And nobody wanted to volunteer. They were sick. They were high fever. I had such high fever, I could not stand up, and they were counting. But I would not dare to say that I need help. Because
I was very short, and when they were started making selections to take kids to the ovens means, you know what ovens are, killing places. So there were bricks, and turning the bricks around, I had a very good friend that we looked out for each other. We knew each other from home. Turned over the
pail.
what you would call a
pail.
water, a can.
Pail, like a water pail.
And we stood there because they went around counting in the morning and at night before you would let you in. And trees. And I never stayed in the front. I always like to stay in the middle so they can't see me. With the brick underneath me, I was a little higher. But they caught up to that, and they caught the both of us in. And we were supposed to go to the guest chambers. That's what they always used to do this on Jewish holidays. They were teasing, there's your God. Took you to the guest chambers. You know I'm unbelieving. So my friend and I were picked up to go to the guest chambers for the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah. You guys know what Rosh Hashanah is, right? So my friend's name was Kiva. They were both the same size, we came from the same hometown in Poland. So Kiva and I, we were a little bit maybe ahead of time. we knew what's going to happen. We always sat or slept near the door. And we seen what's going to happen, we knew what's going to happen. And there were about 4 guards at the door. So one day we watched how they working, that 2 are going for lunch, or 2 are going to the toilet, and 2 left at the door. So we knew if we wait another 2 hours, we're finished. So we decided to make a run. He'll go right and I'll go left, or whatever it is, and they'll never catch up because we were young boys, your ages, but much smaller than you are. And we'll make a run. If we did that, they couldn't catch up with us. We hid us for another 4 hours until they took the rest of the people to the gas chambers, which was on about 15-minute walk from the barracks where we lived. And then came the holiday of Yom Kippur. You guys know Yom Kippur is. Yom Kippur, they wanted to try the world, show the world and the campers that here, there's you God. That's how you believe in God. That's what he's going to say to you. And that's how they were able to get away with it. There were some religious Jews came in from Hungary, and they were great believers in God, that God wants you to die, you're going to be dying. My friend and I, his name was Kiva, we decided we're not going to go to the ovens. We're going to try another run. We made another run, we got away with it, and we had to hide out. And in the barracks from the camp in Birkenau is Auschwitz, they had ovens they never used with openings at the end, and big enough for me to get in there. And I got in this oven, closed my hook, but I don't know where, it was just instinct of living. I got myself in with my legs first and head out. That was on Yom Kippur, 1944. And as I said before, they made all their selections was on Jewish holidays to teach you that's how your God is protecting you. And
So,
I couldn't, go ahead.
no, I was going to say, so Yom Kippur, when you were taken to the barracks, the quarantine barracks, was when your uncle brought the coin.
My uncle was able to smuggle in, when we came to Auschwitz, a $5 or $10 gold piece. You know, we never changed it until we really needed it. And my uncle took 2 coppers, that's guys that run the camp, and he said, my nephew is in this barrack and he's going to the ovens tonight. I got a $10, whatever it was. Can you take him out for me? The guy said, it's not enough. So he got some friends, everybody gave something, and he had enough money to take me out from an oven, from going to the ovens. And he came in with my name, he had on the thing with my number, so he knew nobody else can go out except me. And it so happened when he came in to look for Baranek, which is my second name, and he had it written on a piece of paper. No, but everybody was Baranek. You know, we all wanted to live. And he went around showing, he had his number, my number written on the piece of paper. So he got me and he took me by the hand and pulled me out because he had the money to pay for it. so I survived again. And that was going on until the Russians started coming closer and closer to Auschwitz.
The Russians were coming closer, which they were aware of it. They wanted no evidence to show what was happening in these camps. So they either killed the people, either they lined up and shoot them, or they poisoned them with gas. They would they would give people a bath or a shower. They called it disinfecting shower. But when we went in there, you never knew what was coming out from those little faucets from the ceiling. It could be water once in a blue moon, but most of the time was gas coming out. So when there were 1,000 people in one of these big shower places, 1,000 people were killed immediately. And then to get rid of them, they had other means of killing them. All the possible ways that they could. By experimentation, there were certain high qualified German doctors who worked in these camps doing all kinds of experimentation without any anesthetics. You wondered how those very well qualified doctors could perform this kind of terrible things. Doctors supposed to heal people, not kill people, and this is what they did. So we ended up in this second camp in Germany, which was also a very big camp called Bergen-Belsen, and also another extermination camp. Also, millions and millions people were there. They were from all the countries in Europe, from Greece to Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, all the countries that were sent to these camps. But our group that was taken from from Auschwitz to this other camp was a small group, 500 young women supposed to have worked in an ammunition factory. So that camp, when we arrived, it was called Tannenberg. That there were more than 45,000 camps throughout Germany and Poland. We all know about the big names like Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and Dachau and Mauthausen, but the little ones, like the one, our second camp I went, was only 3 miles from Bergen-Belsen. It was a satellite camp, a labor camp. There they gave us this striped uniform, but it was winter. We had no hair on our heads because we were shaved already in Auschwitz. No underwear, no shoes, like wooden clogs, and it was serious winter. I remember I had to go to work every day, like several kilometers, and it was snowing. And when the snow fell on us, we were all covered with snow. But then middle of the day, like here, sun came out, the snow started to melt. So my dress, instead of having snow on it, it became like water or like wet. And then late afternoon, the sun went down, and this watery dress that I was wearing became like a sheet of ice on me. It was stiff, and you could see that it was ice. I found a cement bag, the cement comes from heavy or paper bag, and I found this empty cement bag, and I put it under my dress to shield my body from this ice. And when we went back to the campgrounds, every time we were checked to see if we were carrying something on our bodies that we shouldn't. And because of that they found that I had this bag under my dress, I was punished. I had to be really, like I committed big, terrible things. So this second camp was already January, February, March, middle of April. Every night we were locked up in the barracks. It was a small camp, I said, 500 women. And because everybody got sick, within a very short time, people got dysentery. You know what that means? and they were dehydrated. And if people get dehydrated, there's no life there. So they were sick. The sick people they would take from this my camp to Bergen-Belsen. But nobody was brought back alive. But once they were taken away, that was the end. So from 500 women, within like 2 or 3 months, there were only 300 left. And at night, you see heavy bombers flying above. That meant that the British or the Americans were already in the act of trying to fight the war in Germany, and hopefully we were dreaming that we will be saved by them. We did not know who the bombers were, but we were hoping that these were the Americans or British. One night, we were trained that every day, if we should not hope that we will be saved. There was no chance to be saved. Why? Because we had to dig our own graves, a hole in the ground, and they practiced, they rehearsed, they will shoot us and we will fall in, and that will be our end. One night, they locked us in, and the next day, we got up for early morning. We were told by somebody who worked in the kitchen that the camp is unattended, no guards there. The guards escaped to save their own lives because the Americans and British were getting close. So to save their own lives, they escaped and they left the camp unattended for a very, very short time. So during that short time that there was total chaos, this guy who was a cook who cooked for the SS guards, he told for the young women who worked in the kitchen that because there is such a chaos, he said, now you have a chance to escape if you want to escape. Because the local civilians who were living around the camp grounds, they did not want us to stay alive there because they didn't want to be blamed what they were doing to us. So they came with their own trucks and their own German shepherds and their own rifles and took everybody who was still alive onto the trucks and took them to Bergen-Belsen, except the few who managed to escape while the chaos was going on. And I and my 3 sisters and a few others managed to escape during that time into the nearby woods. And then when the local civilian came, they didn't find us. They came after us, but they didn't find us. My 3 sisters, we managed to get out of the woods, all got sick, went back to the campgrounds to look for some food. We couldn't find. I remember walking, going to the highway to see if we could meet up with some people, and we met up with some American black soldiers, and I asked with my little English that I had, what day is it? Because we lost all sense of what day it was. They said April 15, and 2 days later, I was 15 years old.
Shevira